Hi there, Liam O'Gogan here, and welcome to another video in the series on my research question, Does it matter? I've decided to try and create a number of different granular videos on some what I consider to be essential topics which set the landscape around my commitment to this piece of research called Does it matter? One of the other videos you will see is around the concept of making a professional apology. Another one which I hope to try and do is to look at the concept of professionalism and what do we expect from professionals. And this one is looking at a question for me of these three sets of or terms. Essentially I want to look at my expectation. The second thing I want to review is what I expect, and thirdly want to look at my experience in life upon reflection. These three grinders to me are relevant insofar as the other topics that I've been looking at in terms of what it matter or does it matter surrounds a number of, say, case studies where I look at situations and I try and forensically go through the facts in each case and establish the facts as evidence-based, traceable and auditable, and both make some commentary on them and some reflection on what should or should not be the right thing to happen as a result of this information. So I realized that it was important that I should, at least for myself, set out what is my expectation. And as I thought about that, and then I thought about separately what I expect, for me it seemed that these were not necessarily the same, although the word expectation is used in both of them, or expect or expectation. I want to differentiate between those two things. So the first thing I wanted to look at was I just looked up the terminology for expectation. So this is in the Merriam-Webster dictionary, and talks here about a simple definition of expectation is a belief that something will happen or is likely to happen, or a feeling or belief about how successful, good something will be. And it's interesting, when I talked this morning to a couple of people about this conversation, I asked one of the individuals who is challenging what he has evidence of is a misconduct in the profession, and I asked him what his expectation would be, and he spoke about what he wanted to happen in his investigation or his challenge to the system. And I reflected with him that that was actually more a question of what he desired would happen as against his expectation. So that's what I wanted to have a look at here in terms of what my expectation is. And so the next thing I did is I said, as I do, I'd look up for some quotations or particularly images around expectation just loosely from the web, and I want to throw a couple of those up on the screen and then maybe come back, because I was in a sense quite surprised at what I saw. But if you just take this one here, it says, if you expect nothing from anybody, you're never disappointed. Sylvia Plath. Okay, so let's just hold that for a moment. Here's another one then. The secret of happiness is low expectations. And another one, don't expect things to happen. It is better to be surprised than to be disappointed. Always hope, but never expect. You can win life by all means if you simply avoid two things: comparing and expectation. So, to be honest with you, this is not what I expected, really, again, what I expected to see. Here's another one. The best way to avoid disappointments is not to expect anything from anyone. And finally, thought for the day 157. There were two ways to be happy: improve your reality or lower your expectations. Okay, so if I take those clips as I saw them, just going back through them again slowly, and as I look at those, really there seems to be a big message in here for me. Just take this, I suppose this last one I think. Expectation is the root of all heartache. Shakespeare. So if I were to take those as a given, it just seems to me that, part of the problem that I might be having in this process of Does It Matter is about this concept of me having an expectation, and that expectation perhaps not being met. So here's another one I thought was interesting. Again, this one is interesting. It says, if you have an expectation of 100%, if you expect yourself to get things right 100% of the time, you are set up to fail and to disappoint. But if you only have an expectation of 90%, your emotional energy can be sent celebrating the times when things are above this mark, rather than feeling devastated because you're missing goals. So this goes back to the essence of a lot of the topics I looked at in the Does It Matter, is about looking at systems and performance, often around the idea of customer service, or how authorities deal with ordinary people, how citizens deal with the state, how laypersons deal with professions, etc. And in a sense, all those clips that I've shown would indicate that for me or anyone else to have a happy life, basically you've got to settle. I mean, that's the concept. Just settle for it. Look, just put up with it and get on with it. And and it keeps repeating itself. So you're not listening here. This is telling you, just Shakespeare. Expectation is the root of all. Let's see. Look at him again. Expectation is the root of all heartache. So it doesn't leave much hope for someone who's trying to correct a wrong or challenge a powerful authority. I don't get a sense of a huge level of support from that. So I went somewhere else. I looked at this other clip here. I just thought this might be interesting. I just thought this was something that more like I thought I might be looking for. It says expectations. So it says expectations establish the standard. So that's the first time I've heard the word standard, and I want to come back to that in a moment. If meeting them is a problem, getting your time shouldn't be an option. Not really sure what that means. Rather than lower my expectations, I just choose to change the people I expect things from. If you tell me you're somebody I can't expect anything from, you're also telling me you're somebody I don't need in my life. So for me anyway, that's the first time I looked at this thing of the concept of expectation being tied in with a standard. Okay. I then just found another quote I thought was important here, probably because of the person who's given it as much sense. It's a quote from Steve Jobs where he says, "Be a yardstick of quality. Some people aren't used to an environment where excellence is expected." So all of a sudden I've got expectation tied in with the concept of excellence and quality. And this is more uplifting in terms of one's desire, or what one should be aiming towards or expecting. So I want to come back to that. And just committed to quality, committed to you. We see this type of imagery when we're being sold both products and services by all sorts of people who want to give us a confidence boost to relieve us of our resources. And here's another version of that where you see the little tick, the quality mark, as we would describe them. And what I'm thinking of, just going back here to this idea of, so what is my expectation? And I'm reflecting on if I engage with a service. So, for example, I employ a solicitor to do a job. So I'm going to ask myself, what is my expectation? And I want to deal separately with what I expect. But my premise is that my expectation is established externally to me. What I mean by that is when I engage a professional solicitor, the very imagery of professionalism and the way in which the legal profession are presented to me are done in such a way as to give me or put in front or posit in front of me an image of high quality, of an ethical process, of attention to detail, of a largesse of honesty, to be capable in the event of them making a mistake to acknowledge it, to apologize for it, to correct the error, and to protect me, the client, from being damaged by their failure to do the job correctly. So that, to me, that's where the word my definition of the expectation almost is like the specification for what the service or the product is. And it's essentially, if I'm buying a product from someone, or if I'm buying a service, that expectation is essentially set by the landscape in which I work, the society that I work in. So if I seek to have someone with a high professional representation to do a job, they come with me having an expectation of high quality work from them. And in essentially, in another way, they're almost like a specification for doing a job or delivering a service. Now, in other cases where I've been looking at, say, one case study I'm going to look at is the process of an application for a job as a census enumerator that I've gone through. So in relation to that, if I were to define my expectation would have come from listening to media interviews by the chief statistician, Deirdre Cullen, from the Central Statistics Office, talking very authoritatively and very convincingly about the quality of their process, their training, the way in which they select people. When I would look on various official websites, etc., I would see the vision statements and mission statements of organizations talking about due process, fairness, transparency, openness, quality systems, complaints procedures, etc. So they, for me, create a landscape where I believe my expectation would be to feel secure within all of that. The second section here then that I had was what I actually expect. And I had originally written the words, what I have come to expect. And I said, to me, in a sense, that was jumping the gun a little bit. And I'd prefer to transfer that element of the conversation into this third area of my experience. And I suppose, so what do I expect as a customer in a situation, or when I engage with someone else, or a service, or a position of authority, or an organization, or a body, an authoritative body. So I'm on one side, and I'm doing business with somebody else on the other side. And I was looking for something that would capture this, and the first thing I came across, or once I came across, but that I locked on to, was, I think we're all used to this. Really, well, it does exactly what it says on the tin. It's the Ron Seal ad that's been around as long as I've ever painted something. So it says this does exactly what it says on the tin, and so I sort of said, well, what do I expect? And really, that's what I expect. I expect that whatever service or engagement I have with some other body, that other body does what it says on the tin. So if I engage with a professional solicitor, I expect them to provide a professional service. And I said I create another granular video in support of that, looking at the idea of professionalism versus amateurism, and what are the comparisons and differences in those. If I apply for a job, and this is particularly in relation to the public service, because I do think there seems to be, there is a difference between private employers in terms of their obligations and otherwise, but there are obligations in the public service about the standards of discrimination and fair play and openness and transparency. So, and these are published on various websites, etc. So my expectation is that the processes will deliver as they say they do, or again, does what it says on the tin. Now, while I was looking for this also, I revisited another quotation which I thought is important probably to throw in here, because it does relate to the larger reaction to the conversation I've been trying to have around does it matter. And it was sent as a result of that conversation. A friend of mine sent me this, and it was a quote from Noam Chomsky, which he says, the smart way to keep people passive and obedient is to strictly limit the spectrum of acceptable opinion, but to allow very lively debate within that spectrum. That's something I think is very interesting, because in Ireland in April 2016 and for the last year or so, we have quite a lot of lively political debate about whether it be this party or that party, or water charges, or again, I think it's very interesting. These are what I think very limited spectrum debates, and we're allowed to have these debates, and we get lots of media coverage about them. But in a sense, they're almost like Mickey Mouse issues that are, as long as we don't debate any deeper issues than that, we're allowed to do that. But in terms of the sort of questions I've been posing around the does it matter stuff, and the different challenges that I would be posing, I keep meeting either a defensive reasoning response, or quite a negative dismissive response, where nobody's interested in really having a debate in that space, and anyone who seeks to poke their noses into this space, and it's certainly in any forensic way, is regarded as a troublemaker and basically an unacceptable person. The other, I found this little picture interesting because, in a sense, when I was asking the question, what is my expectation, and I set that out almost like in a control sim. It's the set point, it's the design specification, it's what's on offer, it's what's written on the tin, and then the next question is, what do I expect? And insofar as there's a gap between what I expect and the expectation there is, and more importantly, if I lower my expectation, that is, if I expect less than the design specification, this will determine my level of customer satisfaction or my happiness with the situation. And in my experience, many people react differently to a service, quality or otherwise. So I found this was interesting because, up in the green area here, we have the little happy smiley face. So here's a happy customer, it seems to me, who has actually received what it said on the tin, whose expectation has been met. Or, in fact, even I'm not sure about that, at least because you see, they may not have required what it says in the tin. They might actually be happy with a lot less. They might be quite happy with 50%. In fact, they may be really happy people. In fact, they'll take any sort of crap, and they say, well, you didn't expect any better. Going back to this what I call the low esteem space. Sure, look, do whatever you want to me. It's better than me starving or something. So they may be like that. But even that, but I'm still saying up here, the top end here, green people, green area, happy, yeah. In the middle here, look, and I'm not too happy about this here. It's not really what I expect. I'd expect better stuff. And gradually, you can see as we move around the clock here down towards the low performance area, where you have quite a gap between the expectation of which is an offer, and the actual delivery of the service or the performance. And you can see one moving from disappointment to frustration to annoyance to anger. And down here there's a term that a man introduced me many years ago, Jack Kerwin, very interesting, when he said, I have exceeded my frustrations tolerance threshold. So somewhere around here you're in the explosive region. And this is really interesting, because I think when someone is challenging an injustice or something that's happening, the obfuscation and the delay and the negativity that one meets along the way can often drive someone from this area here in this direction. And this is very much when there is a denial of the scenario, denial of the problem, a blaming of the customer, an avoidance of taking responsibility, a watering down of reality, and further and further and further delay. So you really have the angry man, as Andy O'Mahony and RT a number of years called me, Liam, you're a very angry man. So you get to this space here when you essentially had a problem around here which you asked to be addressed, and if this was appropriately and professionally addressed with integrity and authenticity, the chances are collaboratively you could have worked with the provider to actually move you into this scenario. So you'd be actually a really happy Liam. And in fact, I would argue that a happy Liam is also somebody who would give testimony of that happiness to other potential customers of that service going forward. So I mean, I still think this is a win-win outcome here to drive in this direction. Whereas if you go back in this direction, obviously this person, including this is the unhappy me, angry me, is not a happy person. So this is not happy endorphin period here. Now if I give up and go away and just I can do this. I can do the what is it this guy says, don't expect things to happen, it's better to be surprised when disappointed. So if I change my disposition to this, then I can be very easily weaned off expectation, right? And then this clip here I got interesting, trouble in the field sort of stuff. Nobody rises to low expectations. So again, this is going back into the Steve Jobs commentary that he had there about some people aren't used to an environment where excellence is expected. So quality, excellence really are, it would appear to me, proportionally related to expectations. There's a quote in the film Thelma and Louise, you get what you settle for. And it also seems to me that there's another quote I want to look up here. Yeah, I just wanted to look up this particular quote that I think is interesting as well. This has a lot to do with expectation. Well, the minute you settle for less than you deserve, you get less than you settled for. So in the sort of recognition of reality that while we seek excellence and may fail to achieve 100%, but that we're constantly striving towards that maximum value of the expectation, or what does it say in the tin, and we're striving for that. It would seem clear to me that the minute you settle for less and you lower your expectation, that the performance standard will reduce itself to even lower than that again. So that lowering one's expectation is really a way of ensuring that you get a worse service than you started with. The other thing about this is that I keep coming back to this quotation, which is central. That's probably not the best version of it, but it's a quotation from Confucius where he says, if language is not correct, then what is said is not what is meant. If what is said is not what is meant, then what must be done remains undone. If this remains undone, morals and art will deteriorate. If justice goes astray, the people will stand about in helpless confusion. Hence there must be no arbitrariness in what is said. This matters above everything. This also seems to me to fit into that conversation of my expectation and what I expect. And again goes back to this guy does exactly what it says on the tin. So what it says on the tin, whatever words are used to describe what's said in the tin. So if the expectation is granted to me as the customer of a service or the client of a professional, what I'm told will happen, if it doesn't happen, if people start parsing words differently afterwards and saying, well, that's not actually what I meant something else, we're all headed into the area of dissatisfaction and chaos. And I think it's a little bit Irish to expect that, well, what we just do is get the client to reduce their expectations and accept any old standard as okay. So what I've been trying to achieve here, sorry, I just have two more clips that I want to put in there while I'm at it. Again, this will think an attitude of positive expectation is the mark of the superior personality. Brian Tracy. Again, Brian Tracy, well-known motivational speaker. Interesting, positive expectation. I think that's an interesting, a positive expectation. As against this, you get what you settle for. In other words, if I look up at this section here, the expectation, there is an expectation. It's what's said on the tin. So if it's that I'm applying for a job in a public service environment, there is an expectation that there will be a clear, open, transparent, quality, professionally run process. And therefore, as a result of that, if I was to interrogate that process, I would be delighted, irrespective of the outcome for me, that I would leave that investigation reassured that those people who are looking after my interests as a member of the public are acting in a competent and an integrated way and an honourable way. I think just a last one here then that I thought just came up. I thought this was interesting because I suppose I have all the images of when we were young, but one of the worst things in the world is when someone makes you feel there's a chance when in fact there's none. Just thought that was interesting, because in relation to the case study that I will put forward about the census enumerator job, as I evaluate that experience at this point, and remember this is a work in progress, and it may well be that I will become severely enlightened somewhere in the future that in fact the process was totally democratic and fair. But if you apply for a job where you've no chance of getting a job, where the job has actually been handed out, or you're basically cannon fodder for that job, that's an awful feeling to get. And you know, my view is I think this is an unnecessary feeling. If someone walks in, I'm not going to give them the job. I'm just saying, well, why don't you just tell them I'm not going to give you the job instead of wasting their time. But it's interesting. I know this relates to probably romantic relationships or where it comes from. That's the imagery. But yeah, it strikes a bell there. You know, someone stringing you along, telling you there's a chance when in fact there's no chance. And similarly, if somebody's offering you a service which is inadequate or unprofessional, and then to continue to pretend that it's going to be, or maybe draw you into an appeals process where the illusion is given that somebody's going to give you fair play when in fact ultimately there's no intention of doing so. That's very hurtful to the person who's targeted with that experience. So just to sum up my expectation, just what I was trying to get clear in my own mind, my expectation is not something that I desire. That's not it. My expectation is set by the standards. Looking at, I go into a shop, I look at a product, I like everything about it, I like the quality of it, I like the testimonials that are granted with it. It all creates an image for me of an expectation of a standard of a quality. And for me, then I simply say, for me personally, what I expect is that it will do what it says on the tin. Now, I accept that a lot of other people who may have all sorts of views and they say, oh, look, I'll take whatever I get. But I have to realise that in my relationship with this research question, does it matter? I simply don't think like that. I simply said, well, if you told me you're going to give me 3, I expect to get 3, as against 55 or 2 or 1 or whatever you have in yourself. That puts me out of sorts when that behaviour comes. And the last action is this: what's my experience of that expectation, how it was met over my period of time as a person. And to a large degree, it's that disconnect that has driven a lot of these reflections or the case studies, the forensic case studies that I've decided to do on what does it matter. I was trying to examine, because I realised without without actual evidence, forensic evidence of situations, it becomes easy for people to water things down and say, well, it's not really like that. There's something else going on here, and you never get it down. So I mean, I've set out the task of just trying to stay with their focus. And if somebody's asking a question, okay, let's look at that question. Is that for real? Is it not for real? Let's get back on track here. Find the essence of what's going on. And then, ultimately, at the end of the day, the does it matter is a question mark. Is, does this matter? And, would it matter to who it's done to? Would people like that, do unto others as you would like them to do unto you? How does that relate to people? And do we think about that when we're taking action? So generally, my experience is varied, and that's and what I want to do is where I've had a positive experience, where what I expected actually turned out to be in alignment with the expectation which was presented to me at the front end. I think it's very important for me to respond to that positively and to mark that. And one of the reasons being because I think there's been a lot more failures of that meeting the expectation than successes. So I think people who do deliver need in our society to be rewarded, acknowledged, recognised, positive testimonies given about them. I think if we have a positive service from somebody, I think what we should do is go out of our way to proactively support and propagate that person's good name throughout society. Equally, where we have a bad experience, our choices are often to shut up and move on, or take a quick fix, or reduce our expectations or put up with it. And what I have decided to do in a number of cases is to try and stick with the challenge and look at how, one, is it possible to challenge a process which doesn't deliver on the expectation which that process itself has created. I think ultimately, as I end this reflection, and I do want to say all this is extempore stuff. I have I've gone looking up some quotes and things like that there, and the difficulty is to try and my objective is try and focus my own mind in terms of what I'm trying to achieve here. But as I come to the end of it, I see an expectation being created for me, externally to me, and I then, as a customer, a client of that service or situation, have to decide, what do I expect of that. So I can go in as a 70% person, I can go in as a 100% person, I can go in as a 20% person, saying whatever. But what I choose that if somebody says to me they'll do something, I expect them to do it. Now, I'm an engineer. I recognise the tolerance that must be placed on any measurement, and that there will always be variables, and that mistakes happen and mistakes occur. And I have no difficulty in recognising that. Again, a quote which I'd hoped to, I can't pull it up here at the moment, from Confucius would say, in fact I'll just look for it. Okay, I had to go off and look for these three quotes here, but it's in relation to my recognition as an engineer of the, even if we try and meet the does what it says in the tin, there may be percentages where we meet the actual perfection. But I think it's important that we're always trying to achieve that. That's the objective. We never turn away from that. We never turn the promise of 100% and represent that to a client and simply say, no, 70% is the new 100%, just because I'm not willing to do my job, or but I'm still prepared to charge it 100% of the money. I have a real problem with that. So, I mean, the quotation I thought were interesting. There's no greater mistake than to commit the same one twice. So, I mean, the first thing about mistakes is that, while recognising people who make mistakes, again, my expectation, as part of that expectation thing built into the promise, is that if there's a mistake made, that'll be corrected. The second thing is this one here by George Soros. Once we realise that imperfect understanding is the human condition, there is no shame in being wrong, only in failing to correct our mistakes. So again, going back to that concept of expectation, that value proposition which is presented to the client or the customer of a service or to the job applicant or whatever, in a situation where an error is made, the real issue is not to try and pretend we're not human, but really the shame is not in being wrong, but it's in failing to correct our mistakes. In other words, this denial phase that we get into. And the final one, again, by my good friend Confucius, I think it's very good. I think it's excellent. If you make a mistake and do not correct it, this is called a mistake. And in the journey that I've been travelling along, the does it matter research question, more than anything else, this is what I would see the systemic fractal behaviour in so many systems. When a mistake is made, what is the response of the power system to the exposition of that mistake by a client, by a customer, by an underling, by a subject, by a citizen, by the underpowered person in that relationship? Is it to, as George Soros says, no shame in being wrong, just in failing to correct it? Is it that we can make a mistake and commit to sorting out, making sure it doesn't happen? Or is the fractal behaviour, this pattern of behaviour, which it appears to me replicates itself at microscopic and macroscopic levels throughout systems, and which seem to grow as they're challenged throughout the system? So I'm minded by a conversation that I heard on a radio programme by the late Michael Mills, who was the first ombudsman in Ireland many, many years ago, with Gay Byrne on RT Radio, when he was talking about his role as an ombudsman and engaging and intervening in issues, or particularly around the public service. And what he said is that when a problem reached the middle ranks in the public service, that it became almost impossible to unravel it, because of this collegiate backing up of people backing up each other. And the collegiate cover-up almost was more relevant than this idea of identifying a mistake, taking professional ownership of it and sorting it out. And that would lead me to suggest that if this video has made any sense to you, that there's another video which I'll put a link to in the information section underneath here, on how my view of what constitutes a professional apology. And obviously I'll have to make another video about what professionalism, in my view, should be. What does it stand for? What are the essence of professional behaviour? And all of those three, then, I would suggest, should inform any of the particular cases that I intend to present in this video medium on the question of does it matter. So thanks for your patience. I just before I go, I better close that down, but I'll just throw one last one up here. Just I don't want to save that. And this one, that was in the recent movie with James Bond, and really, I absolutely appreciate that trying to do this type of analysis or work is like a kite dancing in a hurricane. Very lively, but not very pleasant. Certainly not rewarding in the pecuniary and traditional ways that we in society seem to have placed value on. But nonetheless, as I said, never a dull moment. Thank you for watching. I hope this has been of some value, and I hope to see you again in some other videos. Thank you. I would appreciate your feedback on what went well, what went wrong, and what would be better, if you would send your information to defragmentationwithattitude@gmail.com. Thank you.